Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our World Elder Abuse Awareness Day virtual event. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in today's program. First, all lines are on mute. If you have any questions, you will have the opportunity to send them in at any point during today's presentation by typing your thoughts into the questions pane on the control panel. Any questions not answered during today's event will be collected and addressed after the program. Please be aware that any off-topic or inappropriate questions will not be addressed. If you experience any technical difficulties at any point during our presentation, please explain your problem through the chat feature, and we will try our best to address the issue. Lastly, this is a recorded program, and the video will be available on our YouTube page within 24 hours. Please subscribe to New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Flickr for the latest updates on news, information, and resources from our office. Now, I'd like to hand things off to our first speaker today, Attorney General Grewal.
Hey everyone, I'm New Jersey Attorney General Grewal. This World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, we're urging all New Jerseyans to join the fight against elder abuse. The COVID-19 public health emergency has underscored the terrible effects of social isolation on all of us, but the impact on people who are elderly has been particularly devastating. Elder abuse takes many forms, including neglect or isolation, physical and sexual abuse, financial abuse and exploitation, and emotional abuse. People most at risk are socially isolated, disconnected from their families and their friends, and are often suffering from dementia or poor physical health. Unfortunately, elder abuse remains a significant reality in today's society. Every year, an estimated 1 in 10 older Americans are victims of elder abuse, which involves either intentional or negligent acts that cause harm to an older person. That's why the Office of Insurance Fraud Prosecutor has created elder abuse brochures to warn the public about the types of abuse elders face, the signs of elder abuse, and the resources that are available to them and their loved ones. This is just one step we're taking to help prevent further abuse, and you can be part of the solution. Pay attention to what's happening with your older loved ones, neighbors, and acquaintances. Engage with them. Spend time with them. Volunteer with organizations that assist elderly residents. And educate your friends and family members about the signs of elder abuse. Finally, if you suspect that an older person is being abused anywhere in New Jersey, do not hesitate to report it. Contact our Elder Protection Task Force at 609-292-1272. 609-292-1272. Now, it's my pleasure to hand things off to New Jersey's Insurance Fraud Prosecutor, Tracy M. Thompson. I hope you enjoyed today's informative program. Thank you, and please stay safe.
Thank you all for being here and for your extraordinary leadership in our collective fight against elder abuse. I am Tracy M. Thompson, New Jersey's acting insurance fraud prosecutor, and it is a privilege to join you today in renewing our shared commitment to protecting the safety and well-being of one of our most vulnerable groups, the elderly. Within the first few months of my administration, I formed the Elder Protection Task Force under the leadership of our Medicaid Fraud Control Unit's Bureau Chief, Peter Sepulveda. The task force investigates allegations of financial exploitation, abuse, and neglect of elderly and incapacitated adults receiving Medicaid benefits in the state of New Jersey. 3 years ago, I convened the first OIFP World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event to raise the consciousness of our law enforcement, government, and community partners to the ill treatment of the elderly population. Today, we are proud to continue our annual tradition of recognizing World Elder Abuse Awareness Day with a series of videos that depict the most serious offenses against the elderly: financial exploitation, neglect, and physical abuse. Each year, hundreds of thousands of our senior population are subject to mistreatment. During this presentation, you will see that abusers can be family members, trusted friends, as well as professionals hired to provide care. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenging time for all of us, but for the elderly, the trials have been greater. Social isolation is one of the greatest risk factors for elder abuse, making them more susceptible to scams, neglect, and financial exploitation. OIFP is proud to present this webinar. Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you again for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Christopher Weldon, and I serve as Regulatory Officer and Counsel to the New Jersey Office of the Public Guardian for Elderly Adults. Our office is located in, but not of, the Department of Human Services, Division of Aging. Our office's responsibility is to serve as the guardian to some 1,500 incapacitated elderly adults here in New Jersey. Our office is appointed after the Superior Court and one of the 21 counties here in New Jersey finds a person to be able to lack the capacity to govern themselves or manage their own affairs. Additionally, the court will not appoint us unless they have found that there's no other appropriate friend, family member, or other person who could serve in that capacity. If you know someone that you suspect may be incapacitated and in need of a guardian, I'd recommend that you contact the surrogate's office in the county that you or this person resides. Circling back to the public guardian's role. After our appointment, it's our responsibility to step into the shoes of the incapacitated person and make decisions that we feel that person would have made for themselves if they had not been found to be an incapacitated person. Those decisions range from financial decision-making to medical decision-making and beyond. But specifically and relevant to today's discussion, our office also has the benefit of a VOCA grant, a Victims of Crime Act grant, through the federal government, which has allowed us to implement a financial abuse and advocacy specialist team, our FAST team, which is responsible for securing financial recovery for incapacitated people. We do this both by making referrals to local, state, and federal law enforcement, but also in pursuing civil litigation against alleged perpetrators of financial exploitation. For more information on the New Jersey Office of the Public Guardian for Elderly Adults, I direct you to www.state.nj.us/human services/DOAS/services/PG. Thank you.
She had a pressure ulcer on her back, which when measured was about 11 by 13 inches, and you could actually see her spine.
He kept hitting me and hitting me and hitting me. And he said, "I'm gonna finish you off."
She would come around, she would knock on the door, and after my insistence of him not answering the door, she started to knock on the windows.
I didn't like that assault.
What she started to do was slowly consolidate her aunt's financial accounts, and she also had her aunt sign a quitclaim deed. And that was done several months after Miss King was diagnosed with dementia.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of different ways for an older adult to become abused. Emotional abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse, neglect. Sexual assault certainly happens in older adults. Oftentimes, people who are abused in one way are actually abused in other ways as well.
1 in 10 individuals over the age of 60 are abused, yet only 1 in 25 report it.
So the issues of fear of intimidation and embarrassment, I think, are very common.
Not only is this a current problem, but it's become significantly enhanced with the increase in population. Then we have an obligation and responsibility to equip our officers with the proper tools of investigation and preservation of evidence.
What the patrol officers do when they respond to these scenes is absolutely critical in my final investigation. When they're there, they can ask questions of an investigative nature that I may not be able to ask later on.
Where there's a potential victim and a potential suspect in a house, we always separate them.
Bill, can I have you step back here, please, and talk to me for a minute? Just real quick. Appreciate it.
So the victim and the suspect can't hear each other.
Talking to the older adult privately and asking, is anybody hurting you? Are you afraid of anybody? Is anybody using your money without your permission?
Has he hurt you before?
Dig deeper, try to look for inconsistencies with what the victim could be saying.
Because a lot of times victims will lie to officers just to protect themselves from further abuse.
Use patience and understanding. The victim may be more willing to describe what's going on if you're patient with them and just are sympathetic and understanding.
Just because somebody has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or some other dementia doesn't mean we can't interview them and talk to them, but it does mean we want to pick the times. So for example, there's something called sundowning syndrome, where people with dementia get more confused later in the day.
Keep the questions very simple, very direct. If you need a time frame when something happened, give them anchors like what was on TV at the time. Was it light out? Was it dark out? Was it springtime? Was it summer? Was it winter? Was it bingo day?
One of the most important things is documentation of everything. Everything from smell to sight to, is there food in the house? Is there a place for someone to go to the bathroom, to wash, to brush their teeth?
Look at the evidence. What does the evidence tell you about what might be going on in the home? Talk to the neighbors. Look for other signs of violence in the home.
When you do see some evidence of bruising, asking if you can look at arms, legs, torso, whatever the person will allow you to see is very important because, as we know, bruises fade over time. Bruising that is on the head, neck, soles of the feet, buttocks, torso are highly suspicious related to possible abuse.
This is now my house.
If a suspected abuser hands you a durable power of attorney, don't assume that that means that there isn't a crime going on. A power of attorney is a document that authorizes somebody to act on someone else's behalf, and so legal ability to touch or move or negotiate funds is not the same as a blank check to steal those funds.
We're finding across the country more and more multidisciplinary teams forming so that when that frontline person has a concern, they have a place to go where they have a reliable mechanism where people with expertise in social services, medical care, prosecution, guardian, all those different groups can come together and help figure out what's going on and what needs to be done to protect this person.
We collaborate early. We talk about what to put in a search warrant. We talk about what photographs to take. We have these conversations because we're always sort of thinking to the end of the case.
These interviews and investigations have to be coordinated in such a way that they flow and give reassurance and confidence to the victim. They've just left a chaotic situation. What they don't need is a chaotic investigation.
Having an advocate with me was invaluable because it showed the victim at that time that that police weren't just there to investigate the crime, but the police were there to make sure that they were safe.
Adult Protective Services is in every state. Law enforcement should know who the caseworkers are on their local level.
They have information, they have resources, and frankly, they're really good at talking to these victims. A lot of times they're people that they trust.
And I appreciate what the social workers bring, and the social workers here appreciate what we bring a lot more, and the trust level has gone through the roof.
When a patrol officer goes into a situation where an older adult is there and that older adult might be just sitting in the corner, not responsive, realize that's not normal aging. That's not what should be happening. To see if they're able to interact with you or if they seem withdrawn and afraid, that's a wonderful position that only a patrol officer might be able to really suss out for somebody.
Police officers in general have a pretty good intuition of when things aren't right.
See what's going on, what's bothering them, ask those simple questions that can potentially make a huge difference.
You're not going to catch everything, but in the same token, just put a little bit effort forth, a little bit more, and might come out with something big.
Hi, my name is Beth and I work with Morris County Adult Protective Services. Adult Protective Services in the state of New Jersey is tasked with investigating allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation of the elderly and disabled who are living in our communities. While we are not law enforcement, we often work hand in hand with law enforcement in cases of abuse. The Adult Protective Services client is perceived to lack in mental or physical capacity to act on their own behalf. That makes the role of Adult Protective Services vastly important because we are often the voice for those clients who cannot speak for themselves. The woman who's portrayed in the upcoming video appears to have mental capacity, and she's been her own advocate, while Adult Protective Services clients can't seem to advocate on their own behalf. The Adult Protective Services allows for 30 days for us to investigate these allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. In the cases of abuse, this is important because lots of times people aren't going to tell you their full story the first time that you've ever met them. Sometimes because of embarrassment, sometimes because they're concerned about losing their caregiver, or that they're in other situations that are dangerous for them. So they may not tell us the first time that we meet them. So the woman in the video is a great example of what abuse looks like in our community and allows for you to look out for some of the warning signs of abuse. If you need to contact Adult Protective Services in the state of New Jersey, we can be reached at 609-588-6501.
I was working patrol that day, took a 911 call from a dispatch center that said I need to respond to our local hospital where a woman was there and wanted to report that she'd been assaulted by her husband.
The neighbor had called the police on prior occasions. On this occasion, the neighbor came to the home, he saw her injuries, was very alarmed, and he took it upon himself to call an ambulance. And then it was the hospital who ended up calling the police because they immediately suspected abuse.
You know, when I arrived at Regents Hospital, I spoke with Mrs. Thill, who was in a care unit at that time. She seemed to be in quite a bit of pain. She had sustained some pretty severe injuries to her legs. It appeared she'd been struck multiple times in the face. From there, I went to the house. We both walked up to the door, me and my partner, knocked on the front door, and met Mr. Thill as he answered the door. He was pretty evasive when I started asking about what happened. I asked what had happened with his wife today. He claimed that she had fell and tripped over the cat.
The story that Marvin Thill was telling the responding officer just didn't match with the injuries and what Mrs. Thill had told the officer about what had happened.
Based on, the injuries from his wife and based on the comments from the neighbor, I had enough to put him in custody, so at that time I told him he's under arrest. I assisted him as I walked him out to my squad car. He was able to use his cane. It did take several minutes to get out there. We actually had to pause about halfway between the house and my squad car to actually physically get him in there just because he was out of breath.
Sergeant Nicole Peterson and I went to the hospital about a day and a half after the incident occurred.
She was very bruised, head to toe. The bruising, had turned to dark coloring. At one point during the interview, she broke down crying and said that she was terribly afraid of her husband.
He picked up my walker and he slammed it against my leg. He kept hitting me and hitting me and hitting me. And then he took the walker and slammed it into my stomach. And then he started hitting me again and gashing my leg, hitting and hitting and hitting. And he said, "I'm gonna finish you off."
At that point, he switched over to using his fists and started punching her in the head. It just sounded horrific what she was describing.
She told them that on prior occasions when the police had come to their home, he had punished her for the fact that somebody had called and told them no one would ever believe what you say.
Because a lot of times victims will lie to officers just to protect themselves from further abuse.
When a patrol officer goes into a situation where an older adult is there, and that older adult might be just sitting in the corner, not responsive, that's not normal aging. That's not what should be happening. Observe to see if they seem to be fearful. Observe for evidence of wounds. To see if they're able to interact with you or if they seem withdrawn and afraid.
A lot of times older people have a lot of bruises and they can say, yep, she bruises easy, she fell down.
We know that bruising that is on the head, neck, soles of the feet, buttocks, torso are highly suspicious related to possible abuse. Larger bruises greater than 5 centimeters or about 2.5 inches should also raise suspicion. Multiple bruises should raise suspicion. And we shouldn't overly accept the classic, well, he fell.
Elders can assault each other. The same abuse can happen if you're 85 or if you're 25.
The role of the victim advocate is imperative in these cases. We had an advocate who went to the hospital with us, who was there to talk to the victim about her safety concerns. She was very concerned that her husband would be able to find her in the care facility. The advocate in this case was able to help the victim get an order for protection, which further assisted in her safety. It was once she felt comfortable, once she felt safe, that she felt able to come forward with more information about what had been happening to her for a very long time. Mr. Thill was charged with assault on a vulnerable adult. He was convicted of that offense. We were able to keep Mr. Thill away from his wife and allow her to live a life free of violence. That was the best outcome we could have hoped for.
Hi, my name is Donna Kohler. I'm the Program Manager of Long-Term Care Complaints in the Division of Health Facility Survey and Field Operations. Our program receives reportable events from all of the New Jersey long-term care facilities. Those facilities include nursing homes, assisted living programs, dementia care homes, comprehensive personal care, adult medical day care, pediatric medical day care, and intermediate care facilities for the individuals with intellectual disabilities. We have an 800 number hotline that can be accessed 24/7. We're live Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. On the off hours, we have voicemail where messages can be left. On the weekends and holidays, we have individuals who are on call who access the hotline, take off the messages, and follow up on any calls that need immediate attention. We take all allegations of abuse, whether it be verbal, physical, or sexual, seriously, whether it comes from a facility or a complainant. We have different levels of triage that we assign to each complaint. When we feel it's in immediate jeopardy, those complaints need to be investigated within 2 business days. A harm level, we investigate within 10 business days, and so forth. When the exact accusation of abuse comes from a complainant, a family member, a resident themselves, or an anonymous caller, we try to gather as much information as possible to make sure that we assign the correct triage level. When the abuse allegation comes from a reportable event from a facility, we ask that the alleged abuser, whether it be a staff member or another resident, be removed from the facility if it's a staff member, or if it's a resident to resident, that both residents have been separated and the victim has been assessed for any kind of injuries. The facility then needs to send us an investigation, and we may call and ask for additional information. If we feel that the facility did not do a proper investigation, we generate a complaint and send one of our surveyors to go out and investigate. So this has been a quick overview of what our program entails. I hope this information has been helpful to you. Thank you.
Hello, how can I help you? Yeah, ambulance, yeah. This isn't an emergency, but my mom's got to go to the hospital.
James Kirkland, the suspect in this case, his initial call to 911 was very, very matter-of-fact.
Yeah, I've been caring for her at home, and she's got either a bed sore or a hemorrhoid situation. She's in a lot of pain.
And when emergency personnel arrived, they saw something much more devastating.
The police were contacted in the Kirkland case based on a call from the hospital and a subsequent contact from Adult Protective Services.
When Ms. Kirkland was brought to the hospital, her compression stockings from earlier wound care had fused to her legs and they had to be surgically removed. And then she had a pressure ulcer on her back, which when measured was about 11 by 13 inches. You could actually see her spine. We had been advised by medical staff that her wound when she arrived had been packed with newspaper and some kind of powdery substance.
The son was trying to do treatment on his own, not in consultation with the medical community, which really created a septic situation for her.
I did not feel at that time Ms. Kirkland was going to survive.
Once we figured out what exactly happened at the hospital, we triggered patrol to assist us at the home to secure it for the subsequent search warrant.
And her son answered the door. I identified myself as Montgomery County Police, and he immediately tried to step back in and shut the door. And I had to grab him and remove him from the house because, again, I didn't want him to alter anything inside the house.
Patrol officers transported Mr. Kirkland for us back to the station. During that ride, Mr. Kirkland made several statements to that patrol officer. Those statements, spontaneous utterances. He just blurted them out of his mouth. And that officer was awesome. Took down that information and gave it to us when we got to the station in order to use that for the subsequent prosecution.
And then I went in to interview Mr. Kirkland about the events.
She hasn't been to a doctor in a long time, neither have I.
And you know what? There are people who don't believe in doctors.
It's really difficult to not let your emotions get involved, but I think long term that it's important for me to get that information. And not to be judgmental, or at least appear judgmental at that time.
I did the best job that I could do.
Okay.
He told me that medical care is very, very expensive, and he did not want to spend the money on taking care of his mother.
After interviewing Mr. Kirkland, we did secure a search warrant, and myself and the rest of the elder vulnerable adult abuse team responded to that home with our forensics group.
We had to climb over piles of newspaper and trash and just personal belongings. There was nowhere for her to sleep, nowhere for her to go.
She did not have a bed.
And we saw this white chair that she was sitting in.
But it had pattern stains in it that appeared to be bodily fluids. There were pattern marks on our victim's back above her open wound that actually matched that chair.
We did find a box of cornstarch,
which we later determined is what he was packing the wound in her lower back with, and then cover it with newspaper to try to soak up the weeping that was coming from the wound.
Because her situation had deteriorated to such a point, we were able to move her towards a hospice at this latter stage of her life.
She survived for another month before ultimately passing, which the medical examiner deemed due to her injuries and the care that she did not receive from her son.
She had about $1 million in assets at the time of her death. She had insurance. There were many other choices that were available to prevent her painful death. He was ultimately convicted of 2 counts of neglect of a vulnerable adult, each of which carry a possible maximum penalty of 10 years in jail.
So about a year later, after we had had the Kirkland matter, we had a new case involving a woman named Smith, where patrol officers were the initial responding officers on this scene.
It had been called in by neighbors that Mrs. Smith was out on the street almost to the curb. She was in an adult disposable garment that was soiled. She was in what I classify as like a sports bra. They tried to first ask Mrs. Smith where she lived, who could they call to help her. Mrs. Smith wasn't able to give them that information. And so they did call for an ambulance to come and assist them to check her out and make sure, physically, if she needed anything.
What? Did you go through the house at all? I didn't go through it, no. Sorry.
The patrol officers did what patrol officers do. They walked up to the home and they knocked on the door. At that time, the front door was open and it was a screen door.
Hello? Hello?
They could smell urine and feces and stale odor in the house. Eventually, a woman appeared.
Hi. I guess your mother was outside. She was not completely clothed, but she seemed a little disoriented. So we were wondering if you maybe come out and give us a hand.
She turned out to be Mrs. Smith's daughter.
We'd been screaming for somebody in the house. We were concerned that you or somebody else might be hurt in the house also, because your mother really couldn't tell us that much. She was very disoriented.
She said she had been in her bedroom, and she mentioned that she had an air conditioner running because of the smell inside the home.
Are you her caretaker?
Yes.
You are? Okay.
They checked their egos at the door, and they checked their emotions at the door.
I know it's tough. I've had my parents were stuck at home for years before they passed away.
They were just open and listened, and they took all these awesome notes, and they secured this place and really helped recreate this scene.
Here you go. You're good to go. So she went to Suburban, okay? We're all set. Thank you for your help. Thank you. Okay?
When I responded to the hospital, I noted that her toenails were not cut and groomed, and that's something that I regularly look for. They had dirt underneath of them, her fingernails also. Additionally, she also didn't have great cognitive function. We had conversation, but she wasn't able to answer my questions directly.
Similar to the Kirkland case, law enforcement involved us almost right away to talk about evidence collection and what would be needed to ultimately hold Mrs. Smith's daughter culpable for what she had done in terms of the neglect of her mother. Her mother ended up receiving care in the hospital and treatment and ultimately went to a nursing facility. And part of the probation conditions for the daughter was that she wasn't allowed to care for vulnerable adults or seniors ever, to protect her mom and to protect the community. We know that someone caring for an elderly parent or family member is not easy. That having been said, the choices in these two cases that these children made about the care of their parents or lack thereof resulted in horrible outcomes.
The Smith case is the very beginnings of what the Kirkland case became.
Had it not been for those patrol officers, their abuse would have continued with this woman. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
So I would encourage officers to write that initial report, and when they do, write in there everything that they see and they smell and they hear, because that could make the difference later on in the final prosecution.
Hi, I'm the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, Laurie Fatcherosa Brewer. The Ombudsman's Office advocates for residents of long-term care by investigating allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, including financial exploitation. Financial exploitation by family members is probably the most common form of financial exploitation that we investigate at the Ombudsman's Office. Usually this involves a family member or power of attorney not turning over the resident's monthly income to the long-term care facility. So that would be Social Security or pension payments. This is required to be turned over to pay for the resident's stay. And if the resident is on Medicaid, it's required under federal law that the resident contribute to their cost of care. We also find cases where powers of attorney are transferring funds out of investment accounts or banking accounts and putting them into their own accounts for their own personal use. We also find situations where powers of attorney, family members, caregivers are transferring or liquidating assets without the resident's consent. And that's the critical issue there. It's without the resident's consent. If you suspect financial exploitation of an elderly individual living in long-term care, call the Ombudsman's Office at 1-877-582-6995. In the video you're about to watch, you can see how devastating the effects are of financial exploitation by a trusted caregiver and how easily it can happen. Another point that I want to leave you with is that, as you can see in this video, people who have limited or diminished capacity or who may have symptoms of dementia can make their needs and their wants and their desires known, and they are not necessarily bad witnesses. It's really important that we investigate and prosecute these cases so that we can prevent them from happening.
Patricia King was a widow who was living alone in East Palo Alto. She was diagnosed with dementia. Miss King was 88 years old in 2008 when her niece, Miss Remmert, moved in with her. It was helpful to her at the outset to have her niece living with her because it was somebody to help her out around the house and keep her company. What she started to do was slowly consolidate her aunt's financial accounts, and she also had her aunt sign a quitclaim deed to her home, transferring ownership of the home from Miss King to Miss Remmert, the offender. Miss Remmert's cousins were becoming increasingly concerned about their aunt because of the isolation of Miss King that Miss Remmert was imposing. She was making it increasingly difficult for family members to come and visit.
Shirley began to isolate my aunt by becoming more limiting
of the family and also of her friends and church members of coming to see my Aunt Pat.
Shirley Remmert had changed the locks on the exterior fence surrounding the home and had changed the locks on the home itself. So family members could no longer gain access to the home.
I had called my aunt and I let her know that I was coming.
I called the police.
Okay, all I want to do is see Auntie Pat.
I don't care.
And Shirley called the police and asked that the police remove me from the house.
There were multiple parties that made reports to Adult Protective Services expressing concern about Miss King's welfare. One of the reports came from the bank where she had a checking account. She went to the bank on 4 occasions and she made 4 $10,000 withdrawals. The amount of those withdrawals combined with how close in time they all were caught the bank's attention, and Bank of America made a report to Adult Protective Services that these were suspicious transactions on an elder's account and asked Adult Protective Services to look into them.
A social worker who's described as a deputy public guardian who does just financial abuse cases became involved in the case because of the financial allegations.
They phoned Miss Remmert in advance and they made arrangements to meet up with her, with Miss Remmert, at Miss King's house. The deputy public guardian made the decision to reach out to the East Palo Alto Police Department and ask them please to send an officer as a civil standby to simply provide safety and make sure that things at the home went as smoothly as possible.
She kind of gave me a brief of who she was going to talk to and why she was going to talk to her. I knew we had something a little more than just a civil standby. She had some substantial evidence and information.
When they went to the residence, they found Shirley there with Aunt Pat. The deputy public guardian had a very pointed and direct conversation with Shirley about the nature of the financial improprieties that they were aware of based on Pat's financial documents. And Shirley was taken aback, to say the least.
Miss Remmert was nervous, she was inconsistent. At that point, she threw her hands up and said, I liquidated the money.
What?
It's in my room.
And at that point, I escorted her to her bedroom. She then pulled out a box of money. In the end, after counting, it was about $80,400. Due to Miss Remmert's inconsistencies with her answers, and finally showing us the money that she did liquidate, I arrested her.
Most financial elder abuse investigations are complex, and we generally advise law enforcement to gather their evidence and then consult with the district attorney's office to see what the next steps are before taking a suspect into custody. But in this particular case, the fact that the quick-thinking East Palo Alto Police Department apprehended Miss Remmert on the spot was crucial to our ability to not only preserve the cash that was seized from the home, but also to freeze the home and execute a search warrant, and a tremendous amount of crucial documentary evidence was discovered. This document over here, it says quit claim deed. When you signed this, did you believe that you were giving away your house?
Oh no, I'm not giving away my house.
The fact that the victim of a crime has dementia shouldn't necessarily indicate to you that that person cannot be a witness, and an important witness in their own case. Do you want to continue to own your house until you die?
When I die, my people divide my house.
These are the kinds of cases that are nuanced. They typically involve very complex family dynamics that have taken decades to evolve and are only getting worse as time progresses. So if there's history with that family, Adult Protective Services will be able to provide that to you while you're in the field. And that situation that's in front of you that you're looking at is going to look really different through the lens of all of that information than it does when you're just standing on the porch with someone trying to figure out whose paperwork is more legitimate than whose.
At the end of the jury trial, Ms. Remmert was convicted of multiple felonies, and the trial judge sentenced her to 7 years and 4 months in the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The cash that had been seized from the home was released back to the victim, and the judge signed an order voiding the deed and returning Miss King's home to its rightful owner.
Hello everyone, and thank you for your interest in learning more about the topic of elder abuse and elder financial exploitation. I am Lieutenant Cheryl Smith, and I work for the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice in the Financial and Cybercrimes Bureau located in Trenton, New Jersey. Some of the types of investigations we conduct on behalf of the New Jersey Attorney General are mortgage fraud, investment fraud, and general types of theft by deception cases, as well as financial exploitation. If you or someone you know may be a victim of elder financial exploitation, you may file a complaint online at njdcj.gov. However, I encourage you to first call your local police department or 911 for immediate assistance. The video you are going to watch depicts what happens in cases of financial exploitation by strangers. If you have any questions at all regarding this type of crime, just type them down in the chat and I will answer your questions accordingly. Thank you.
One day, my uncle called me and he said he needed some money, some bonds. So, without question, it's his. I gave it to him, and it was a significant amount of money. And 3 weeks later, he called me up and he said he needed more. And I go, "What are you using this for?"
Misty McKinney found Roger Waller, we think, at a gas station. We think she simply saw an easy target. She asked him for a small amount of money. He gave it to her. Somehow she found out where Mr. Waller lives, and she proceeded to go to his home, and she would ask him for money. She would ask him for rides.
Misty McKinney was the type of person that she preyed on people like that. She looked for opportunity, people that she could manipulate and take advantage of.
On a few occasions, Misty McKinney had Mr. Waller drive her to the gas station, and when they got there, she'd have him fill up her boyfriend's car with gas. And that made Mr. Waller very uncomfortable, but he didn't know how to say no.
She would come around, she would knock on the door, and after my insistence of him not answering the door, she started to knock on the windows. When she would show up here, bugging you, what did that feel like to you? When she was knocking on the windows?
She knocked on the window here.
Yeah. How'd that make you feel?
I didn't like that at all.
His train of thought was, if I just give her what she wants, she'll go away. Well, we obviously know that that's not the greatest idea. So I put a surveillance camera up so I could see when she was coming, what times of day she was coming. I could see 2 in the morning, I could see 4 in the morning. One day, she had walked around the house for an hour, knocking on windows and doors.
What are you doing here?
Mr. Waller told her he didn't want her to come to his home anymore. He felt intimidated. He was starting to feel scared because she simply wouldn't stay away.
I noticed he became quieter. He just seemed way more reserved than normal, lost weight.
Mr. Waller's family actually caught her in the act of coming over and knocking on his door. Despite numerous requests to stay away from the home, she kept coming back. So they got a restraining order.
She knew she was taking from somebody who didn't have anything to give her and kept coming back and back and back and back and would not go away.
The first time Misty was charged, she was charged with a couple counts of violating the harassment restraining order.
She was caught once, she went to court once, pled guilty once, and they let her go. And when they were supposed to bring her back for sentencing, she never showed up.
It was really difficult because she would come at all hours of the day, and then she was gone so quickly. And so it took a long time before we were ultimately able to take her into custody.
As we were building evidence for the case, specifically looking at the financial exploitation, it ultimately came down to evidence and what we could prove in court.
In this case, because it was small amounts of cash over a long period of time with really no record kept, we just didn't have enough evidence to establish the amount necessary for a felony level financial exploitation case. The most serious offense that we had was a stalking offense, and so that's the one I charged. I will say that as part of her sentencing, it was important that she be required to pay back some of the money. I was happy with the outcome of the case. She was terrorizing him. At one point, he told the investigator that he felt like a prisoner in his own home, and stopping that was really our #1 priority.
How are you feeling now that she is no longer...
Well, I feel good about it.
You feel good? You're feeling a little bit more like yourself?
Yeah.
When you walk through this neighborhood, they know who Roger Waller is. He's known in his community. And for somebody to be known in their community, loved in their community, to be taken advantage in their community, to be made to feel like they're not safe is not okay.
Hello, my name is Kathy Fries, and I am the Program Coordinator for the Office of the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Program. As such, and along with the Program Director, Deputy Director Anne-Marie Taggart, I help to develop and conduct trainings on human trafficking for our state and local law enforcement, government and non-governmental agencies, our schools, our victim service providers, nonprofits, as well as almost any industry throughout the state. These trainings and conferences help to combat human trafficking by giving law enforcement and prosecutors the tools and information they need to reach more victims and to prosecute their traffickers, as well as to educate the community at large. Our human trafficking unit, along with all 21 county prosecutor offices, human trafficking liaisons, assist in investigations into allegations of human trafficking activity and or any tips or leads received by our 24/7 New Jersey human trafficking hotline. Anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. Traffickers exploit the vulnerable, including the elderly. The video you are about to see, although it does not mention human trafficking, it has all the elements of a trafficking crime. Exploitation, keeping someone against their will, profiting from that exploitation, and stripping away a person's basic right to freedom. This is a perfect example of the importance of looking beneath the surface, to consider the possibility of something else going on beyond just what you were seeing at that moment, to ask another question, to check it out, and not to be quick to dismiss. All to be able to truly see that victim, just as the officer does in this video. Thank you.
The first time I spotted Mr. Hill, he was walking down Clifton Springs Road. It was just weird to have someone walking down the street with a sweater on, some shorts, carrying a big blanket. So I decided to turn around and have a little chat with him. Hey, you okay? Initially, he told me that he was being held hostage in a basement. A basement? I'm not gonna lie, I thought he probably was a little crazy, but something was going on and I was like, okay, well, let me see if there's some truth to this. He was able to tell me his name, his date of birth, the last address on his license, so he was coherent enough. And he actually said to me, he said, I know I sound crazy, but I'm telling you the truth. I patted him down before I put him in my car. Well, he actually handed me some bent up nails. So he explained to me that she actually took the nails and bent them to lock him inside of the room, and the nails held the door together. At that point, I put him into the unit, and then we proceeded to drive around so we could try to find the house. I proceeded to ask him, do you know what your house looks like? He tells me no, he's only seen the house once, and that was when she brought him initially to the residence.
Mr. Hill had been in the basement, and he could hear what was going on above him, in the house above him. There was a family up there, there was a dog, and he recognized the bark of the dog.
That could be it right there.
At that point, the dog is barking. He says, this is the house, this is the house. He's pointing at the house. I get out as I make my way towards the residence. I come in contact with Mr. Wheeler. Mr. Wheeler was dirty. He had a lot of crust and stuff on his face like that. He was walking very slow. It looked like he was malnourished.
And she asked him who lives in this house.
Do you live with someone in the basement?
And that's when he told her that there was another guy, but he had busted out that morning. And she realized, wow, that this maybe this is true.
Is this Mr. Hill? He came over, identified Mr. Hill for me. At that point, I asked him to show me where he was, staying in the basement. He proceeded to walk me around the side of the house, and we came to a door at the back of the residence. When I saw what I had, I called for some units to help me secure the location because it was a pretty big house. I called detectives, crime scene out so we could get a search warrant, make sure everything was processed legally. So the chain of custody was there.
It was so wonderful that she thought to get a search warrant, to bring a detective to the scene, to bring crime scene out to the scene, to take the photographs and to do everything properly. And that means it was all recorded and I was able to use it as evidence.
While we were out here investigating, Ms. Faust actually pulled up into the driveway. She was in an Escalade, her daughter was in the passenger seat. At that point, I did transport her down to CID headquarters.
This is Detective Russell. I'm out at Clifton Springs Manor. I'm out with Johnny Ray Hill. What's the living conditions like where you were staying?
The door is locked all the time until she comes in to feed her.
Okay.
Which is twice a day.
All right, what about sleeping? What do you sleep on?
One single bed. You should see his damn bed here. That looks like a damn trampoline for a kid.
What about shower?
It's a aluminum bowl under the table there in the room.
She fill that up every day?
No, about every 2 weeks.
What about restroom?
It's a paint bucket, discarded paint bucket. That's what you do 1 and 2 in. Peeing and shitting.
Okay.
And that's it.
Anytime elderly or disabled people are exploited, it's always about money. The detective was looking not just to see what was happening in the basement, which is where the 2 men were living, but they also searched the upstairs. He found a bank statement that had Johnny Hill's name on it and also had Chandra Faust's name on it. And she had actually added her name to his bank account and that's how she was able to spend all of his checks. And we have actually had photographs of Chandra Faust accessing his funds.
Now, did you ever talk with her about putting her name on either one of your bank accounts?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever let anyone else have permission to take money out of your account to a debit card?
Absolutely not.
Or did you give anyone permission to write checks on your account and take your money out?
Absolutely not.
The grand jury indicted Ms. Faust on false imprisonment, exploitation of a disabled adult, 2 counts of abuse of a disabled adult, and also 2 counts of theft by taking. She was sentenced to 20 to serve 10, and that means 10 years in custody, followed by 10 additional years on probation.
It felt real good to see Ms. Faust go to jail for what she did. To take someone's freedom from them unwillingly, to me, is very bad, but crimes against elderly people who can't help themselves. She was praying for her own financial gains.
I think the most important thing that Yolanda did was give him some credence. She listened and she investigated what he had to say, even though it sounded a little bit crazy.
I think Officer Shields is an excellent example of what a police officer can do and what a difference they can make. Going with that gut feeling that something doesn't feel right and pursuing it until her concern is satisfied.
Elder abuse is occurring pretty much in every city and every county in Georgia, along with throughout our nation. If there's financial exploitation occurring, then usually there's either abuse and or neglect occurring at the same time.
Mr. Hill went into a much better place. It was paid for with his check. It was not a homeless shelter and it was not somebody's basement. I went to see him there and he was very happy. He was able to tell his story and he didn't have to tell it from beyond the grave like he thought he might.
Thank you everyone for attending this year's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day video series. My name is Peter Sepulveda, Bureau Chief of the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit is the state's leading investigative and prosecutorial agency combating elder abuse. In 2019, we formed the Elder Protection Task Force. The Elder Protection Task Force assembles the state's leading representatives and experts from all state departments and agencies combating elder abuse. It also assembles county representatives as a force multiplier to get the word out and educate the public regarding elder abuse. I'd like to thank all of our partner agencies for their participation in this event today, giving the terrific introductions to the videos, and for the work that they do on a daily basis to protect the elder population of this state. The theme of this year's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, building strong support for seniors. Each of us, in both our professional and personal lives, should strive to do all we can to build strong support for elders, to be there for one of the state's most vulnerable populations. Now, if you are aware of the occurrence of elder abuse in any form, please call 609-292-1272. I'd like to thank you again, and together we can make a difference in the fight against elder abuse.